He didn't believe her. None of them did. Because when Avery Lane looked that Marine dead in the eye and said two words, last chance, they laughed. Didn't know what she was, didn't know what she'd done, didn't know that the quiet girl they surrounded at 200 hours was a Navy SEAL combat master on rest status. They jumped her anyway. 10 seconds later, not one of them was standing. So before we show you what happens when you ignore a SEAL's warning, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Smash the like button, hit subscribe, and don't forget to turn on the bell icon. Because the next time you hear someone say last chance, you'd better hope it's not her saying it. The gravel lot behind the Joint Tactical Integration Facility was quiet that morning, except for the steady clang of ruck weights being dropped and the occasional bark of a cadre correcting form. It wasn't a base exactly, not Army, not Marine Corps, not federal law enforcement, but a shared regional complex where branches and agencies sent personnel for blended combat readiness. That meant the usual chain of command didn't apply. And in places without clear rank structure, ego took over fast. She stepped out of the admin trailer without ceremony. No weapon, no clipboard, no nameplate. Just black boots, tan pants, a plain gray shirt, and mirrored glasses that covered most of her face. Compact, maybe 5'5", lean muscle with no wasted movement. She had the kind of body that didn't draw attention until it moved. And then it was all anyone could see. Most people missed the tattoo on her inner wrist. A small one, no color, just a quiet mark shaped like something between a serpent and a dagger. She said nothing as she crossed the training pad and knelt next to a half-disassembled grappling dummy, adjusting the chest straps while others watched from a short distance away. She didn't need to introduce herself. They did it for her. "Hey!" someone called out, loud enough for the group but directed squarely at her. "You here to drop off the coffee? You got lost, sweetheart." The voice belonged to Danvers, contractor, mid-30s, ex-infantry, now collecting checks training tactical response teams overseas. He was broad, loud, tanned deep from time in hot zones, and didn't like being ignored. Next to him, two other trainees, Lopez and Ferris, chuckled. Young, cocky, both high on pre-workout and ego. One of them muttered, "Stretch warm-up yoga must be in the wrong building." The woman didn't flinch. She stood slowly, checked the dummy's spine, then turned to face them. Her posture was loose but aligned, like someone measuring wind, not threat. "You're gonna need to speak up," Danvers grinned. "We don't do sign language." She tilted her head slightly, then finally spoke. "I'm not here to fight anyone," she said. Calm, level, not defensive. "Walk away now." The air shifted. A few nearby trainees stopped moving. Ferris blinked. Lopez smirked. Danvers cracked his knuckles like a man who thought he was stretching before a set, not standing on a ledge. "Yeah? That a threat or a nervous breakdown?" Danvers said, stepping forward a half step, enough to test boundary. The woman didn't repeat herself. She didn't smile. She just looked at him like he'd already made his decision. Behind her, one of the instructors had walked out of the admin office and paused, watching, not interfering, not yet. And Danvers, he laughed, loud, confident, dismissive. So did Lopez. Ferris elbowed the guy next to him like it was open mic night. She didn't react. She just turned back to the dummy and finished the straps like the warning had never been issued. But they all heard it. And hours later, when the medics were hauling bodies, and someone was screaming about a shattered elbow, that single line would echo like prophecy. "I'm not here to fight anyone. Walk away now." They didn't. The observation deck was loud. Boots stomping, instructors barking, laughter bouncing off the metal railings. But inside the combat arena itself, it was quiet. Avery Lane stood exactly where she'd been placed, right side of the sand-swept training pit, 2 meters from the blue tarp that marked her team's gear zone. She hadn't touched her helmet, hadn't even glanced at the padded batons laid out like relics on the table behind her. She just stood there, hands at her sides, eyes steady, like someone waiting for a storm to pass. Across from her, 3 male Marines had already started circling, chests out, chin high, one of them slapping the handle of his training baton against his palm, like he was itching for a reason to swing it. The staff instructor hadn't even blown the whistle yet. But that didn't seem to matter. They said this one's a reserve fill, one Marine sneered, looking Avery up and down. Not even rated for full contact. Don't worry, I'll go light. Another one grinned. The third didn't speak. He just rolled his neck until it cracked. Up in the booth, one of the observing instructors leaned toward another and asked, not quietly, "What's her deal? She hasn't moved." "Apparently ex-army," came the reply, laced with condescension. "SIGINT, desk jockey, intel stuff. Not much field rotation. Probably thinks this is about reflexes." The first instructor chuckled. "She's not gonna fight." In the pit, one of the Marines finally broke formation and advanced a step too far, his boot crunching down in front of hers. Not touching. Not quite. Avery didn't flinch. He leaned in. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I won't tell anyone if you quit before the whistle." Still nothing. No blink. No tension. Only one subtle movement. So minor it went unnoticed by the others. She looked down. At his boot. Then at the ground between them. And then directly back at his throat. A shift so small it might have seemed like a non-reaction to anyone else. But to the Marine in front of her, it felt like precision. Like she'd just measured him. He took half a step back without realizing. His buddy noticed. "Yo, what are you doing?" The Marine paused. "Nothing." The staff instructor finally raised the whistle to his lips. Avery's team hadn't even geared up, and the murmurs from the booth kept coming. "This is going to be quick." "I'd almost feel bad." "She's not going to fight." The whistle blew. Avery didn't move. The Marines did. All three. At once. The first Marine went for the takedown, low and fast, like he was going for a trophy, not a spar. He aimed to hook Avery's legs and slam her backward onto the rubber matting, probably expecting a yelp or flail or panicked defense. He was already grinning when he dropped his center of gravity, hands stretched out for a grab. But Avery had already shifted. No one in the booth caught it, not even the instructors. The camera feed wasn't focused on her feet. All they saw was her pivot, her right foot sliding diagonally just enough to slide his momentum off axis. And then she dropped, not away from him, but toward him. She didn't counter the takedown, she redirected it. Her right arm looped under his extended elbow, not to strike but to rotate, his own force collapsing his posture. Her left shoulder dropped, weight transferred, and then he was airborne. Not because she threw him, but because she let his own body complete the movement he'd started. His back hit the mat with a muffled grunt. Avery never looked at him, because the second Marine was already swinging. A padded baton whistled past her head, not because she dodged late, but because she'd already stepped inside the arc before it finished. It caught only her hair. Her hands were empty. She hadn't picked up a baton, but now her forearms were locked under his grip, elbows tight to her body like a lever. She didn't need a weapon. She was using his. One twist, shoulders snapping around like a door hinge, and the baton clattered to the ground. He tried to wrench away. She didn't let him. Her knee rose right into his gut. He doubled forward on instinct and then froze, because she had her elbow positioned under his chin, one slight lift from collapsing his airway entirely. But she didn't strike. She released him, let him drop to one knee, breathing hard, confused, like something had short-circuited in his training. Up in the booth, one instructor jolted forward. "Wait, what did she just... Rewind that camera." The third Marine, quiet until now, rushed her. Blindside angle. She wasn't facing him. He came in hard, hoping to grab from behind. But that's when the real silence hit. Because what happened next didn't make sense. Avery didn't turn, didn't pivot, didn't brace. She ducked, and the moment his arm passed over her shoulder, she locked it. Not with a flashy twist, not with a brute force trap, but with the exact angle of control taught in elite restraint programs, the ones never made public, the kind used in detainee extractions and black site handoffs. She moved like someone who had trained to disable, not to win. The Marine's face slammed into the mat so fast his legs flailed after impact. He didn't get back up. The entire room froze. No bell rang, no whistle blew, but the fight was over. Avery stepped back, silent, breathing steady, and walked toward the edge of the pit. She still hadn't picked up a baton, and she still hadn't said a single word. It was supposed to be routine. The drill wasn't even being recorded for official review, but every instructor had a habit, especially when it came to recruits flagged by the brass. Someone always ran a local backup feed, which is why, by 17:30 hours that evening, the footage had already circulated to half the base, and by 1800, every instructor in the mess hall was watching it on someone's phone. At first, it didn't even look impressive. Avery wasn't flashy. No knockout punches, no aggressive stares or showboating, just clean, silent disassembly. But that's what made the silence louder. No stance adjustment, muttered one instructor, pausing the frame. She baited him, on purpose. Another zoomed in on the moment she redirected the first Marine's dive. That's not academy. That's foreign theater level. Who the hell taught her that grip? And then someone caught the third takedown, frame by frame, the restraint hold, the lock, the pivot. That's when it shifted from curiosity to fear. Where's she from again? Asked a senior evaluator, frowning. Another pulled up Avery's digital profile. Contractor, signals intelligence, attached to Cross-Branch Joint Task Force, deployment history classified under OGA parameters. OGA, other government agency, the kind of label that didn't mean civilian support. It meant, don't ask. That was when Lieutenant Colonel Sorrell, the officer who'd originally signed off on her silent inclusion, got the knock at his door. 2 instructors, 1 training chief, all 3 silent, holding out a tablet. They didn't need to explain. Sorrell watched the footage once, then again, and by the 3rd playback, he set the tablet down. Was this sanctioned? No, sir, not on the record. He nodded slowly. Who made the call to put her in that ring? Sergeant Dallin, sir, said she wasn't showing enough aggression in drills. Sorrell didn't raise his voice, didn't shout. He just closed the door behind them and said one sentence that would later appear in the disciplinary review. You better hope she doesn't file a report. But Avery didn't. She didn't ask for an apology, didn't escalate the incident. She didn't even respond when asked to debrief it. She went back to her bunk, back to her nightly logs, and stayed silent, which somehow made the entire thing worse, because no one could read her, and no one could tell what she was holding back. The tape was flagged, do not share, but it didn't matter. By the end of the week, it had passed through more phones than any sanctioned training clip in the last decade. It wasn't about the fight. It was about the way she walked away from it, as if it had never happened. The silence didn't calm anything down. If anything, it made people nervous. Avery didn't strut, didn't complain, didn't gloat. She reported to every morning drill like nothing had happened, didn't correct the rumors, didn't defend herself. She just ran, lifted, filed data when ordered, and when pressed during tactical analysis sessions, she'd offer answers, brief, clear, textbook. No speculation, no embellishment. For a group built around bravado, that kind of silence was worse than arrogance. So they made a decision. If she wasn't going to talk, they'd force her to react. It started with a fake miscommunication. She was marked absent from a scheduled session, despite being there on time. Public write-up, then a misrouted gear drop. Her boots replaced with a half-size too small. Her pack stuffed with 10 pounds of wet sand. She didn't flinch, didn't even file a correction, so they escalated. Instructors pulled her aside for a mock after-action review, framing her as the weak link in a simulated hostage op. I just don't get what you're doing here, Lane, one sergeant said. This isn't signals anymore. This is close quarters, real stakes. She stood at attention, eyes forward. Understood, Sergeant. No, it's not about understanding. It's about belonging. Do you really think you belong here? She didn't answer, which only made it worse. They finally tried to provoke her in front of the group. Day 19. Open drill. Rain, mud. Midday heat hanging thick over the compound. They handed her a 30-pound steel sledge and pointed to the tire stack. 300 strikes, barked an instructor. Now. Avery didn't ask why, didn't question the number. She just raised the hammer and started swinging. No gloves, no rest. By strike 80, her palms were red. By 140, they were blistered. By 200, bleeding. Someone radioed in quietly to ask if they should cut the drill short. The lead instructor answered with a shrug. She'll break or she won't. She didn't break. Strike 300 landed just as the sun cut through the storm clouds. Light catching, the sweat streaked across her face like paint. She set the hammer down, walked to the line, and waited. No words, no eye contact, just her posture. That's what did it. Not the feat, not the strength. The fact that she wasn't doing it to prove anything, she was just doing it, which scared the hell out of them. Because if this was her staying quiet, what would happen if she ever decided to speak? The review wasn't scheduled, it wasn't routine, and it definitely wasn't friendly. The man who called it in didn't do so casually. Commander Jason Reeve, cross-branch advisor, former SEAL Team 6, now assigned to oversee inter-service tactical cohesion efforts, arrived with zero warning. His chopper touched down late in the evening. No ceremony, no press, just boots on gravel and eyes scanning the compound like he already knew what he was looking for. Reeve wasn't just another suit. He'd fought in 2 wars, run Black Ops under 4 administrations, and personally written the assessment criteria for this very program. And as he stepped into the debriefing tent, flanked by 2 civilian observers, the tone shifted. Instructors straightened their backs. Students whispered. Lane, he said without introduction, eyes locking on Avery. Step forward. She moved without hesitation, posture precise. You're the only non-combat branch applicant here, he said. Like everyone else either served in direct action units or trained for it. Yes, sir. You know what they say about signals intelligence people trying to go kinetic? Yes, sir. What do they say? That we don't understand the terrain, that we analyze from distance, not live it up close. And are they right? Avery didn't blink. No, sir. One of the civilian observers wrote something down. Reeve turned, slow and deliberate, toward the instructors. I've reviewed the footage from her sledgehammer drill. I've reviewed the sabotage on the gear load. I've reviewed the falsified absence report. A sharp inhale from one instructor, quiet, but too late. Not only is this a procedural failure, Reeve said, it's cowardice. You couldn't break her with fatigue, so you tried to break her with bureaucracy. No one spoke. Avery remained still. Then Reeve did something no one expected. He walked toward her, paused, and held out his hand. She took it, firm shake, no emotion. This girl, he said to the room, has endured more psychological warfare in 20 days than most of you have in 2 deployments. And she's still standing, still calm, still focused. Silence. She's not weak. She's mission calibrated. And she's staying. Then, almost as an afterthought, and I suggest every instructor here read her file again, this time with both eyes open. The civilians followed him out. Avery didn't say a word. She just stepped back into formation. But from that moment on, no one looked at her the same. It was supposed to be a corrective group exercise. That's how they justified it. Officially, a night operation to test reaction times, small unit cohesion, and close quarter maneuvering. Unofficially, it was a trap. They waited until the instructors had gone dark, until the officers were in their quarters, until only moonlight and memory kept the training compound alive. 8 of them, every one of the boys who'd mocked her, doubted her, sabotaged her, led by Corporal Hayes, the same one who'd flung dirt at her boots during the blindfolded drill. They caught her just past the motor pool, alone, silent, heading back from the gear room. No cameras, no instructors, no oversight. Perfect. Even an analyst, Hayes said, stepping into her path. Avery didn't flinch. You got a lot of people fooled, he said, but not us. The others fanned out behind him, surrounding her in a tight semicircle. You know what happens when a single weak link thinks it belongs in the chain? Another said. It breaks under stress. A third stepped closer, cracking his knuckles. You're not going to file a report, are you? Or run back to your little signal tent? Avery's face remained unreadable. She didn't retreat, didn't ask for help, didn't even raise her hands. She just breathed. Then one of them moved, quick, reaching to shove her shoulder and throw her off balance. That was the last mistake. Because Avery wasn't trained for brute force. She was trained for precision. Her left foot slid back 6 inches, weight shifting low. Right hand caught the incoming wrist. And without even using her other arm, she leveraged the momentum into a redirect that flung him off balance and slammed his chest into the side of a transport truck. Thud. He didn't get up. Another lunged from behind. But she turned, low and pivoted, elbow meeting rib at the perfect angle. Crack! Hayes cursed and charged, fists clenched. He never reached her. Avery dropped low, swept his leg, then rose with a palm strike so fast it stunned even the boys watching from the perimeter. He staggered. She caught him by the collar and whispered, "You call this stress?" She let him drop. 4 of them stood frozen. 3 others had backed up. Not one dared take another step. No shouting, no taunts, just Avery, standing in the center of their broken circle, not even out of breath. And still, she hadn't said a word, not until she turned her back and walked away. Only then did one of them mutter, "What the hell is she?" Another answered quieter, "I think she's the reason this whole program exists." It was supposed to be a silent after-action review. No confrontation, no investigation, just a name roll and gear check before lights out. But when Lieutenant Halverson entered the debriefing hut that morning, he paused, because Avery Lane was already standing at attention, center of the room, arms at her side, uniform perfect. And the rest? Scattered, bruised, avoiding eye contact. Hayes had one arm in a sling and a red welt still darkening beneath his eye. "What happened?" Halverson asked, voice quiet. Silence. He turned to Hayes. "Well?" Hayes didn't speak. "Avery," the lieutenant said, "did something occur last night?" She didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't flinch. She simply said, "Yes, sir." Halverson waited. "Would you like to explain?" "No, sir." A beat. "You're not going to report anything?" She looked him in the eye. "That won't be necessary." It was then, right then, that the room seemed to exhale, as if the air itself had been waiting to see if justice would be demanded or deferred. But Avery had already chosen, not revenge, not discipline, just silence. The kind that tells you everything you need to know. Halverson stepped forward, looked each of the bruised trainees in the eye, one by one, and finally said, "Dismissed, all of you, except Specialist Lane." They filed out, quiet, careful, slower than usual. When the door closed, Halverson sat down. He didn't look at her, not at first. Then, "Why didn't you want to escalate it?" Avery answered, "Because they weren't the threat, sir." He raised an eyebrow. "They were the test," she said, "and I passed." A long pause. Then Halverson nodded, slowly. "Yes, Specialist, you did." He stood up, turned to her fully, then gave a sharp, respectful salute, not as a superior to a subordinate, but as one soldier to another. She returned it, wordless, calm, and the next morning, without any announcement or ceremony, her name was added to the classified transfer list. Destination unknown, unit redacted, but every person in that room knew the truth. She was leaving not because she had failed, but because she was already beyond this program, because whatever came next would need someone even stronger than they knew how to train. What would you have done in their place? Would you have stayed silent like Avery? Or made sure every last one of them paid? And if someone like her, quiet, precise, untouchable, stood across from you in training, would you even realize who you were dealing with? Drop a comment and let us know what you think. Then tap like, hit subscribe, and don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who respects the quiet ones. And while our other videos are now on screen, cue one up next. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with a brand new story.